Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of our series, Museums Restart, conducted with the U.S. Embassy here in Tel Aviv, and also with the Smithsonian Museum in the U.S. And this is a very exciting session for me because we have here a speaker I admire and had the privilege to collaborate with in the past. And we have today Professor Christiane Paul. Christiane is both a professor at the School of Media Studies, the New School in New York, and also an adjunct curator of digital art at the Whitney Museum, also in New York. I can also share, she has curated some of the most exciting exhibitions in the field of digital art in recent years. She, for instance, co-curated the show called Programmed that was on at the Whitney a few years ago that is not virtual, very much a physical show on digital art that was, for instance, that was about digital art and choreography or movement, which inspired me dearly. She has also wrote the textbook, I think originally in 2003, the textbook on digital art that is being widely taught at schools, art schools and media schools, media programs all around the world. I hosted Christiane a few years ago, once we still hosted physically people and had them travel via actual air. And that was at a special conference we held in print screen. I think that was 2018 or 19, no, 18. And now I'm privileged to have her online with us, straight from New York, I believe, and talking on a subject that, at least in my forum, the online and digital forum, we've been starting a conversation in the last year, which is the subject of curation for digital environments or online environments. And with that, I give you the floor, Christiane. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for the generous introduction, Lior. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to everyone for attending. I will start sharing my screen now, and I think you have to change it to...
Oh, wait a second. I'll give you the...
all participants.
No,
because...
I think...
No, you need to make her a co-host, I think.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'll make you a co-host, since for some reason, yeah,
the sharing options just seem to have changed.
Okay, so let me, I'm actually making you host. Let me see if it works. Okay.
No,
I know, because I couldn't, she already was a host. So let's see, I think it works now.
Oh.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. So I will talk about exhibition curation for online and virtual spaces, broadening it up a little bit, because I believe that over the past year and a half in particular, the idea of online exhibition has really suffered from a lot of categorical instability, because over the past year plus, so many institutions have moved online with all of their programming, and experiencing exhibitions, be it exhibitions in physical space or exhibitions of online art on the web, has become the norm. So this, I think, has changed the landscape and conversation a little bit. And I wanted to start with the representation of physical art online. I'm just showing you a screen recording of the Whitney's recent show, Vida Americana, which closed recently. My point here being that museums have over time become much more sophisticated in representing their physical exhibitions online. So what you see here almost becomes a little documentary on the show, on its background, on educational materials. So what institutions now represent online about exhibitions amounts to a different experience of a physical exhibition. We also have to keep in mind that strictly statistically speaking, most people experience an exhibition in physical space online these days through websites. So just by sheer numbers, that is a little bit more. We have also seen in recent years Google Arts and Culture representing physical spaces online. And I think this is a great way of taking a look at galleries from any place in the world remotely. But of course, it doesn't substitute for a physical experience of a museum space. It's a great way to familiarize yourself, but doesn't go much beyond that. And what becomes a little bit more problematic or enters a different realm is the concept of experiencing works up close through extreme zooms. So this is a way you wouldn't see Van Gogh in a museum space, of course, but goes beyond the capacity of the human eye and is closer to what a conservator might experience and see. So here we are radically changing the perception of art through Google Arts and Culture. We also have to keep in mind that social media engagement with exhibitions has vastly grown. Once again, many people experience an exhibition at a museum through Instagram images. And while that is great on the one hand, I also want to point out that there is a kind of flattening through the interface itself. You're seeing here next to each other the Whitney Museum's and MoMA's Instagram account. And everything is presented in grid form, looking very similar in some way or another. So once again, we have to consider how the experience of the art is radically changed through the interface at hand. Social media have also been used in basically getting more information or making more information available about museums' collections. SF MoMA's initiative Send Me was a very popular one. So in this one, you could just text a word or an emoji to a SF MoMA's account, such as Send Me Cats or Send Me a Cactus. And in return, you would receive works from the collection. Once again, to familiarize an audience here and experiencing art in a very different way. And then my presentation seems to get stuck right now. I hope it will pick up again. Okay, here we go. Everything a little slow. So finally, I want to talk a little bit more about online exhibitions of internet art, which is what you would associate with online exhibitions. So curation online by now has a history of almost 30 years, or we're approaching 30 years. What you're looking at right now is a more historical exhibition that was curated by Janga and mounted at the Kronos Art Center as an online exhibition and also in physical space. The reason why I'm bringing up this exhibition in particular is that it used a slightly different model than just representing one museum and one museum space, in that it collaborated with a lot of institutions. So for example, the show borrowed a few pieces from the Whitney Museum's Artport website, specifically the Sunrise Sunset series, which I will talk about a little bit later. So these works, which play for 30 seconds, typically on the Whitney's website, were shown on the servers of multiple participating institutions. So here you had an online show that branched out to several institutions. I think this is an underused model that we're hopefully going to see more of in the future. And once again, I'm experiencing a little bit of a lag here in forwarding the screen. And
that's part of the online experience of these days.
I was wondering if it might make sense to hand you control in order to advance the slides. If this doesn't change, I actually have to stop sharing for a moment. Okay, so finally, looking a little bit more at Artport and the Artport commissions, I launched the Artport website at the Whitney Museum in 2001. And ever since, we have commissioned and co-commissioned more than 102 artworks for Artport. So the setup here has changed a little bit. There have been different programs over time. And right now we have the bigger commissions and then the Sunrise Sunset series. The goal of Artport is to provide access to original works of net art commissioned for the platform, as well as documentation of new media art exhibited at the Whitney and in the museum's collection, to introduce visitors to net art within a museum context, and also to chronicle how the medium of net art has developed over time. I'm going to give you just a few examples of more recent works. One of them, New York Apartment by Sam Levine and Tiga Brain, which launched in 2020. And what the artists did here was scrape.
Sorry, I'm just interrupting you for a second. Do you want me to show? So I can't open the keynote on this computer. I can share the Artport website, or we can try.
Oh, just a second. Am I not sharing anymore?
No, you're not sharing anymore. That's why.
I am
no worries.
Sorry.
Okay, now we can see it. Now we
on my end, everything worked perfectly. So let me zip forward again. Okay, so here's the overview of the Artport website that I had shown. And here we are looking at New York Apartment by Sam Levine and Tiga Brain. My apologies, because on my end, it looked like I was still sharing slides. So for this piece, the artist scraped real estate listings for New York from prominent sites and combined them into one huge site, one huge New York apartment, which is for sale for millions, billions of dollars, consists of more than 65,000 bedrooms, etc. And part of this is also a virtual tour of different kinds of layouts. So the artists also merged all of those apartment listings into one huge New York apartment. What this work becomes is really an overview of the landscape of living in New York, the marketing language. It's really a portrait of the real estate market, of the different demographics and their desires. And I think this was a work that particularly resonated at the time of the pandemic, because it really showed us all the kind of connectedness of being stuck in our respective apartments. And I apologize for the continuous problems. I really have issues with navigating the screen here and losing control over it.
No worries. We can take, okay. So we now see the next, well, basically it's still from the New York apartment. We see a different image.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another work that we showed was basically a continuous performance by Michael Mandiberg. And the work is called Life Study. And Michael was basically on a daily basis streaming his painting in his studio in order to do portraits of all of the assistants that had been working for him since the existence of his studio. So he was basically painting portraits of more than 50 studio assistants, highly coded, since the size of the canvas also corresponded to hours and years they had worked for him. The goal of the project being to highlight the invisible labor that is happening at artist studios and the invisible force of studio assistants. And of course, the fact that this is an endurance performance also is part of this. And once again, I'm trying to advance my slides here. Perhaps we can switch to discussion a little earlier if this continues.
No problem at all.
Yeah. Maybe I'll already start talking about the next project while I'm trying to bring
maybe we should press the button 20 seconds before, but I'm already
No, I'm already doing that and have been doing that, but it's still unpredictable. Yeah. So another work that we commissioned for Artport and that particularly resonates with the current moment and current time was public key, private key. I think all of you may have heard about the recent rise and gold rush surrounding NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which have been the latest craze in selling digital art through the blockchain. And Jennifer and Kevin McCoy did a piece in 2019 already, where they opened up donorship or applications for donorship of a work through tokens and through the blockchain. So what the artists did here was donate a 16mm film to the Whitney Museum and then opened up an online application where people could become officially donors of this work to the Whitney Museum through applying. It was an experiment. It was extremely interesting how excited people became about being represented as donors on a museum website. One aspect of the piece was also that in the 16mm film, you are basically seeing the key numbers, for the blockchain being inscribed in stairs and in a railway. So you could also piece this together on your own. And the work really showed engagement with museum donorship and democratizing that process. We were very interested in seeing how many people would trade their donorship, because that was part of the problem. They could have traded online. Nobody did. They all held on to that title of being a donor to the Whitney Museum. So I want to move on talking a little bit about the Sunrise Sunset series, which has not existed from the onset of the Whitney's Artport site, but been created a little bit more recently, or only a decade ago. So the series was initiated at a time when the Whitney Museum's website would change from a white to a black background at morning, evening, respectively. And we thought that it would be nice to accentuate this with an artwork. This change of the background color is not there anymore, but we kept the series because I think it is really interesting. So for every morning and every evening at sunrise and sunset in New York time, an artwork will basically take over the website and play out. It's more of a performative action and a different format because the work is not accessible beyond this. Once its duration is over, it is archived only as a screen recording. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Very timely was a piece that we showed last year, American Artists Looted. And this work basically really referenced what was going on in New York and around the world at that time. And those were the Black Lives Matter protests, which prompted many museum spaces to board up their windows. So museums over the summer of 2020 were boarded up. And obviously websites at that point became once again, or were the only way that people would interact with and experience the exhibitions at a museum. And what American artists did here was basically board up the website. So if you came to Whitney.org at sunrise and sunset time, all of the images on the website would be replaced by these wooden planks, basically giving the idea that the museum was boarded up. So for American artists, this also was an act of refusal that extended the physicality of this tension between protests and the social issues to the online space. And I will show you quickly, if this loads, how this actually played out on the website. Another idea embedded in this performative action was, of course, that many of the items in museums around the world can be considered as looted from different cultures, although that is not necessarily the case for the Whitney Museum, which isn't an encyclopedic historical institution. So here you see what the experience would have been like for anyone who came to the website at that time. The project that is currently on view is by Le Turbo Avedon, Morning Mirror, Evening Mirror, a work that I think once again resonates with the time of the pandemic. Le Turbo Avedon has been existing online as an avatar for the past decade and has experimented with virtual selves. So in this particular work, you see an overlaid mirror onto the website. Le Turbo also created the mirror emoji, which was officially accepted into the library of emojis. And through this overlaid mirror, you see fly-throughs of an apartment. So for the work, Le Turbo actually created multiple fly-throughs at sunrise and sunset, different lighting conditions through an apartment. What I think makes this work resonate a lot with the experience during the pandemic is that you could see this mirror as both a window into someone else's apartment or world, or metaphorically as a mirror reflection of your own. So here, just one of these fly-throughs through the apartment. Le Turbo also very nicely incorporated some works from the Whitney Museum's collection into this. So what you see in some of the scenes in this apartment, there are 7 different ones for morning and evening respectively, are works from the Whitney's collection hanging on the wall here. So once again, more than 102 projects in the Artport collection. I'm going to speed it up a little bit because I have a lot more material and we won't be able to go through all of this. I wanted to briefly touch upon virtual recreations of physical work that allow you to experience it in a way that wouldn't be possible physically. So what you're looking at here is an app that was created by Itaú Cultural in connection with a show of Lygia Clark's works. So this is Livro Obra. So this was one of the book projects that Lygia Clark created, and typically you should interact with that book as it is exhibited in physical space. Obviously, for conservation reasons, this is not what museums or institutions will do. They will not allow visitors to interact with this book. So through this app, you can experience the work as it was meant to be seen. And another work they recreated online as a simulation was animals, large-scale sculptures that Lygia Clark envisioned being installed in cities They also exist as smaller sculptures, and you are, as a visitor, supposed to change their form. And in this case, this fantastic architecture of animals allows you to interact with the sculpture in virtual space through your hand and modify the experience. So here, the virtual version of this piece gets to something that could never be done in physical space. I want to bring up one more scenario that we have seen a lot of over the past year, and that can be highly problematic, which is the skeuomorphic representation of an exhibition, meaning the simulation of a physical exhibition in virtual space. Many institutions and spaces defaulted to this. Oh, we just recreate our galleries and the art in them for online experience. We have seen this happening a lot in the 1990s when museums first moved online and represented their exhibitions online. And there somehow was this urge to integrate the physical gallery space. What we learned from these often failing experiences was recreation of physical space online gets in the way of experiencing the art. Looking at a very good reproduction of the art or a video in your browser window may be a way more successful experience than clunkily navigating through a recreation of a gallery in which a tiny little JPEG is hanging on the wall. So interestingly, this happened again a lot over the past year. And I think one needs to be very careful about it. There is a rationale for giving viewers an experience of how the exhibition looked in physical space, but you do not want this kind of recreation to get in the way of the experience of the art. And I'm going to represent a very successful, I think, counterexample of that, which was Claudia Hart's The Ruins, shown at Bitform's gallery and online at Mozilla Hubs, where a lot of exhibitions were being shown. So Claudia's work, without getting into too much detail of what the show was about, really dealt with the ruins of modernisms through the work of Matisse and Picasso. And what you see here are photographic representations of the work in the gallery space. And then you could also see the same thing on Mozilla Hubs and navigate through. And I think what made this very successful is just a different type of experience in different spaces, and keeping in mind that all of the work that you see in the gallery really originated in this digital space. So the wallpaper here was designed by Claudia digitally and then printed and reproduced for physical space. So the experience in the virtual world in many aspects is actually more native to the work itself and how it should be experienced. Lior, I don't know if I should end it right here and open up for discussion. I still have a lot more, but we can also jump back into the presentation. Yeah.
Sure. So maybe we'll start with a few questions to just have some conversation starting, and then maybe you, if it's easy to answer with examples that you already have in the slides, maybe we can continue to slides. I just unhosted myself, so I'm not sure if people can see me because I pinned you. They can see it's a gallery mode. Okay.
It depends on each.
I see, but maybe Mayan, if you can just unpin Christian for the conversation part, because otherwise they will probably see.
Okay, I will do like a speaker.
Okay, so in the meanwhile, I'll just get the ball rolling. And first of all, thank you, Christiane. This was fascinating. And I'll ask you one very practical question, maybe about the inception or management of Output. You've been quite consistently working with artists over, as you mentioned, more than a decade, I think now. And my question to you, because there are museum professionals who I guess maybe want to consider holding their own art port in, I don't know, Tel Aviv Museum or Israel Museum. The challenge is, I guess, should they create an infrastructure for multiple artworks, you know, just invest in like an environment to, I don't know, host multiple arts and artworks and artists, or did all of the projects go through different programming and design stages? And I mean, did they require going from scratch and building something new? And in that case, you know, how did that process look like?
That's a very good question. So Artport was launched in 2001, so it's now existed for 20 years. Sunrise Sunset, the Sunrise Sunset series has been going on for only 10 years. And your question, you know, to the core of your question, this has actually changed a little bit over time. When I originally created Artport, it was an artist who designed the space, and it looked very different from Whitney.org. It was a Flash site that existed as a satellite outside of Whitney.org, for which we then started commissioning projects. Over time, we integrated Artport more and more. If you now visit Whitney.org, you find on the homepage direct links to Artport, and the design of the landing pages is completely integrated with Whitney.org. It all looks the same, and you find links in different spaces. For example, if you go to exhibitions on Whitney.org, you will also find links to the latest Artport projects. You know, I think this is a very good model, you know, rather than creating a satellite site, to integrate online exhibitions so that you also don't create hierarchies between the physical and the virtual, you know, and that an online project has the same kind of prominence online as another solo show of an artist would have, for example. That being said, on a more granular level, of course, all of the artists create their projects. Yeah. So the apartment, for example, was something that was entirely coded by Sam Levine and Tiga Brain. And in the selection of the artists, I also make sure that they are net artists with a lot of experience in programming. What we cannot provide as a museum is basically programmers for implementing from scratch a work, working with artists whose medium this isn't. Yeah. So the artists I invite are also very experienced net artists. We then, in the end, bring over we have tech specs from the start in terms of what kind of versions of PHP and whatever it is, scripting languages we are running and what could be supported. And then the digital media team basically implements the works on our server. So it's also important to us that we are hosting the works on our server and retain a copy of it. Typically, that implementation is not too work intensive. Good example for a slightly hybrid approach was Live Study by Michael Mandiberg with, I showed the endurance performance. As you can imagine, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of hours of this. Yeah. And it ran runs, if you visit the page, in a scrollable interface to which you can access. So Michael was running this on his end first, and we're going to transfer an archive later. Where it becomes a little bit more work intensive for digital media is with Sunrise Sunset, as you can imagine, yeah, because that is a direct intervention into Whitney.org on all pages of the website. Yeah. As I've shown, this is not a work where you go to a landing page and you click and launch it, but no matter if people want to see it or not, if they are visiting Whitney.org at sunrise or sunset, they will see this piece. And that requires a lot more tweaking without getting too geeky, but our developer has been struggling a lot with alpha channels for video-based works, etc. Yeah. So I think if museums think about this from the start, it's very important to think about these two aspects. First of all, the integration into the website, rather than necessarily building a complete platform, which will create hierarchies. It's unavoidable. And then also how much support they can provide, because it is extra work and extra stress for existing digital media teams who are working on museum websites.
Definitely one of the subjects we talked in the digital and online forum is that we still have this convention or paradigm that websites are for information. So even when they are presented, even when art is presented in a museum website, it's usually not to convey an emotional experience, an aesthetic experience. It's much more for giving you information or metadata about the artwork. And we actually encouraged museums that came to the meeting, museum professionals, at least in the off chance they have a grant for that, or they're planning to completely remake the website in the next few years, to really think about the museum platform as a platform and as an emotional experience, perhaps, as really as a museum experience per se. Because that's very courageous what the Whitney has done with allowing this performative piece to be integrated so nicely into the website. It's such a rare example. I can't really think about other museums who have done similar things.
Yeah, I also can. I want to tie this back to the points I made in the beginning, because it perfectly resonates with that. So obviously, I think over time, museums have been striving to create more of an emotional aesthetic experience in representing their informational materials. You know? Like with the brief video clip I showed from Vida Americana, for example. This is different from your standard information about a show. It already strives to give you more of an emotional aesthetic experience. At the same time, it is still information about an exhibition in physical space. But once again, over the past year, I think this has become very, very unstable, in the sense that museums have, due to closed spaces, tried to really do online exhibitions, but online exhibitions are physical work. And this is, I think, where this confusion about materialities comes from right now. And I would say that we're really witnessing an ontological shift when it comes to objects and materialities and their experience. And I'm not sure if through the pandemic, this will change forever.
I have just one last question for you before I open up for the audience question, which in the meanwhile, feel welcome, audience members, to send the questions via text, or if you want to raise your voice, just alert me that you want a chance to speak out loud. So my second question will be, how do you, as a very experienced curator of digital art, avoid the issue of digital, which is used in a gimmicky or fetishistic way that really celebrates digital? And you mentioned NFT, which I'm sure it has a lot of value, especially in the questions of monetizing or monetization of digital art, the question of ownership of digital art. But in many cases, the fact it became so massive also went really fast to like popular culture, and just use, digital art becomes like this gimmicky thing that everything now, or every GIF is a digital art and everything is digital art. And I wonder, do you have a set of criteria or something that you look for when you go and curate an online exhibition around the topic and then decide which works work as digital art?
Mm-hmm. So I've always made a point of staying away from the latest, the newest, in the sense of just following trends. and what is being discussed in the media as the latest fad. Yeah. That being said, I think that artists tend to be ahead of the curve anyway and investigate issues much, much earlier. I brought up Public Key, Private Key by Jennifer and Kevin McCoy. Kevin McCoy actually in 2014, launched basically a platform for minting, creating NFTs, and saw great potential in this for the art world. Nobody picked up on it at the time. So he was way ahead of the curve. And the project that we did around donorship also happened before the NFT craze. So on the one hand, I try to stay away from the kind of trendy media topics and still be very much in the moment in terms of what artists are thinking about without presenting it in the context of newness and the hippest and the latest. And I very much agree with the Whitney's chief curator, Scott Rothkopf, in this sense. So we always try to stay away from that dangerous aspect and at the same time still try to be leading in terms of exploring new territory. And it's a fine line to walk, but once again, I think it's crucial to not dilute the important work that artists are doing through contextualizing it in terms of trends.
Definitely. I'll read a few things from the chat. So first of all, Ruth, thanks you. Your presentation is very interesting and fresh. Thank you. I'd love to see more. Hope that we have time maybe for 1 or 2 examples in the end. And I'll read Ellie's question. And Ellie Weisbert is asking, going to a museum or a gallery is an emotional event, the decision, the date, the proper outfit, the atmosphere. How do you overcome the lack of all of those when curating a digital experience? What should be the emotional uniqueness of a digital experience?
Great question. So I think the emotional experience of a digital work and digital exhibition, it's very different from the start. And this is also what attracted artists in the 90s. So while I am super excited about all of the aspects you're mentioning, I love going to openings and dressing up and the physical experience, but then there's also the beauty of the moment of hanging on your couch at midnight, relaxed and getting completely lost in this artwork and exploring it. So the intimacy of exploring that work is a very, very different one. What is also wonderful is the experience of network collaborative pieces, of which we have seen a lot in the 90s. I recall using a work by Mark Napier, Pea Soup, where through your interface, anyone in the world could basically work together in launching these graphic forms and sounds. And I was, quote unquote, playing with someone, going back and forth, in launching all of those aspects. And then I couldn't leave because I thought, what if this is a little kid who will be horribly disappointed if I stop playing now and continue doing this? So I think those are moments that really create intense emotional experiences for net art and online exhibitions that are radically different. You also have to consider it within the context of the online environment per se. For example, exploring New York Apartment by Sam Antiga is just such a wonderful way of completely recontextualizing the real estate scene and online experiences of it. So qualitatively, this is very different, and we cannot try with net art to replicate the experience of going to a museum from the start. We have to really play with what this art form has to offer.
Thank you so much for that answer. Yael asks, I'm really curious about the traffic of these digital exhibitions because we are struggling with it. Do you advertise it separately?
We have found that it's most successful to advertise digital both through its own channels, like I typically post on my Facebook account or on the Whitney social media account. They also post launches of projects. I send out to my mailing list of contacts. So on the one hand, I'm basically hitting the net art scene and the people who have been for decades interested in this type of work. But we also make a point of including these pieces in the actual press releases of upcoming shows. So like most institutions, the Whitney is doing these general releases where it will announce all of the upcoming shows and programs. And Artport projects are being included in that. And I think this is key to broadening the audience, because by nature, online art has had its own type of audience, and we want to overcome that type of segregation and also expose people who by nature would never be interested in checking out an online artwork and make them curious about it. Sunrise Sunset also is a great way of doing that, I think, because you just surprise people with this. There is, by the way, I didn't mention that, there is a little tab on the top left of the window that indicates the name of the artist, so people do not get completely lost when this happens. Jody did a piece for Sunrise Sunset. Once some of you may be familiar with their work, they in the 90s started really also playing with the aesthetics of the back end. So we got messages, I think someone hacked your server, and people got a little confused about the aesthetics of it.
I just wanted to elaborate and say that I think it's very much also the responsibility, as you demonstrated, of the Institute that sometimes still treats digital experiences as an add-on or as a nice to have, or something maybe that is related to the education department. If your museum curates a digital exhibition and it is, curated by the curator and being treated as it should be treated as, I think, a full or similar manner to the way you will treat a traditional physical exhibition, that means the PR people should be aware of it. So in Israel, I sometimes notice that they don't even inform the PR of such things. Like they focus on like the main things, because I can understand it, because from a marketing perspective, that sells tickets. And I think we still have a question, a subsequent question of the business model, right? Because a lot of museums avoid getting into digital experiences because these are still perceived to be only something that has a cost, but not necessarily something that has, an income.
Well, I would say that it really, online art also broadens the audiences. Yeah, it brings a different type of audience to the museum space that will hopefully further explore and also learn about it. I also must say that in terms of press for the institution, Artport has been internationally incredibly successful. So for a publication in Spain or in Italy, it's nice to write an article about the shows that the Guggenheim and the Whitney are mounting, but at the same time, there's a slim chance that the readers will actually have the time, even in non-pandemic times, time and money, to go and see the shows. So it's more informational. But if you report on online art, which has been happening a lot internationally, people are able to experience it the way it should be seen. And I think I would say this has had a huge impact.
Yeah, definitely. Also, if you remember, if the people here who've been on our first meeting of the Digital Forum this year, we actually really stated that the advantage is going global. And it could be part of your global museum strategy, because it's not exactly an even playing field. It's not completely even because the budgets are different, but still you know, relatively speaking, it's, you know, these are exhibitions that could be, and, you know, they use the same link as a Whitney link or a MoMA link. In the end, it's all links to websites. So you could get the exhibition really famous using the online channels in these cases.
Yeah.
If we don't have, I see we don't have an additional question on the chat. If somebody wants to raise their voice to make themselves heard, this is the chance. If not, maybe we can use the 7 minutes we have left to talk about maybe another example that you have with you. I think some people wish to see more examples.
Sure. I don't know if.
Let's hope the tech works. It's always, you know, it's always nice to be reminded that one of the issues is always the maintenance and the unpredictability of tech.
And I think once again, you have to set the sharing options. I'm getting the.
Let's see. So I think that's one
second. Now it.
I think you're hosting it. So yeah. So
now it works. Yeah. So by the way, feel free to interrupt me with other questions that might come up. But since we have a few more minutes, I also wanted to touch on artificial intelligence and what we have seen happening in that context within museums. So going back for a second, we even have seen the museums and AI network, you know, as responding to recent developments and the increasing use of artificial intelligence in museums. So this network in particular was or is focused on AI ethics and museums. There have been experiments such as Iris Plus, which is an AI project that basically tries to capture the personality of the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil as an AI chatbot. So we're seeing more and more of these types of experiments. And you may also know that an AI curator has been named as the next one for the Bucharest Biennial. What you're seeing here is not the AI curator, it's just images the press used for giving physical robotic form to this. So at the Whitney, we also have been looking into this. And once again, I feel that there is a kind of urgency in exploring the topic, but we also wanted to avoid this trendiness of just jumping on a bandwagon. So we recently commissioned a work called The Next Biennial Should Be Curated by a Machine. And this was a co-commission with Liverpool Biennial. And what the artists, Übermorgen, in collaboration with curator Joasha Cruiser and Leo Impet did here was train an AI on all of the data pertaining to Whitney biennials and Liverpool biennials, and come up with an AI that curates in the form of picking artists or, you know, writing artist biographies. Rather, the artists are fictional, doing press releases, curatorial statements, and also reviews. So if you are visiting the website of the project, you will have this spinning kind of graphic background with a lot of little wheels on it. As you click on the red wheels, you will get some information about the project itself. So you will also learn about the interface and get a little bit of an idea. And as you can see here, this is the experience throughout. This AI constantly writes and rewrites its statements. And you are, through those little wheels that you see here on the interface, you are launching different versions of biennials. they are all also accompanied by a soundtrack from the TikTok playlist, basically pointing to the automation inherent in this process. You can turn off the sound. So what you see here is the AI writing out artist bios. In this case, all of the artists have the same first name. So this is a mashup of existing artist bios. Then you see curatorial statements being typed out. And by clicking on the next button that you see here at the bottom right of the black window, you can switch between the reviews and the curatorial statements, etc. There are 64 different universes of biennials, so 64 different types of biennials that you can see being launched here. And in all of them, the weighting of the software is slightly different. So the results will be slightly different. So here I just launched another one in the background. Here you have artists with different names, once again, mashups. And what is really interesting about this project is to see our own curatorial desires and tendencies reflected in what the machine makes of it. So Whitney Biennial 2020 will be the first in a new series of public art exhibitions that will see present-day practitioners engage with and reflect on spooky, unorthodox, and experimental attainment beyond the art object. Yeah, so it's sometimes really pertinent and really funny. At times, this curation gets incredibly woke or socially engaged. It's every conservative's nightmare in how it mashes up, like gender, protest, activism, etc. So it is a reflection back of our curatorial desires based on what the software really has learned from that training. So I'm trying to stop sharing right now. And one anecdotal thing I want to add to it is, so we trained the software and all these museum data sets, and then Leo, who was in charge of the programming, came back to us and said, this somehow it doesn't work. The language is so academic and so boring. We really have to find ways of, spicing this up a little bit. So out of that learning experience, we fed the AI a lot of Rolling Stone magazine and other sources just to change the language of it a little bit and make it more interesting.
So I really appreciate that we ended up with this more speculative take on, well, the possibilities. And the possibilities given AI as a fellow curator, a fellow writer, a fellow artist, co-artist, but also I think the future of, what can we learn from these AI experiments about the arts world and the way it works and also its language in a way that maybe can make us improve and be more engaging to different people.
I think this is actually what AI is good at, rather than waiting for it to curate a spectacular biennial for us, which it can be because it is being trained on our data sets. So it will be redundant by nature. What it is really good at, I think, is making us aware of the data we are generating.
Definitely. And with that, I would really like to thank you again for this lovely hour. I think the people who joined us today really enjoyed it by what I'm hearing in the back channel. And it was a pleasure to see you again. And I hope to see you again and invite you again physically to Israel for a longer period of time. And in the meanwhile, I invite everyone here to check out the links. It's really easy going into the Whitney website and checking Artport. And there's hours and hours of adventure time and exploration in all the past, in the archive and the current works. And with that, again, thank you so much for your time. I want to thank the U.S. Embassy and especially Paulina, who is not here with us in organizing this. I want to thank Mayan from ICOM Israel in organizing this session, and all of you for joining us this afternoon or this morning for you, Christiane. Thank you again, and hope to see you soon in the next meeting in the final meetings of this series.
Thanks so much, everyone, and apologies for the tech problems.
No worries at all. Thank you. So just, I can't stop the recording. That's the only thing, since I'm no longer the host.
Oh, me too. I can't either.
So Christiane, you have the mission of stopping the recording. For
so
us.
Thank you, everyone. Christiane, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to have you with us. And I